I have a confession to make. It's something I was hoping to distract or hide from throughout my political career, but since my opponents are using it against me, I will admit I am a Quebecer, and from time to time, when I am speaking with Quebecers, I might use the word we. However, in my choices of policy, in my approach to this country, I have always spoken for and to and with all Canadians, and I will continue to.
Oh, yes, he speaks to all Canadians, but sometimes when he's in Quebec, speaking in French to his friends, he tells what he really means, like what he told La Presse the other day, that there's no way he wants to reform the Senate because we have 24 senators from Quebec, and there are just 6 from Alberta and 6 from BC. That's to our advantage. A man who wants to be Prime Minister for all Quebecers. Well, joining us now, moving from a divider to a uniter, is one of our favorite guests, Premier Brad Wall of Saskatchewan, who joins us now from Regina. Premier, I was very frustrated by this us versus them regional biased approach. What would you say to Justin Trudeau in particular and to the question of the Senate?
I think he's entirely missed the point about concerns raised after his remarks, Ezra, and here's why. The problem is not the pronoun. The problem is not that he said we. I'm from Swift Current. I'll talk about my fellow citizens in Swift Current in terms of we. The problem is the comparison, is the advantage that he's talking about, that he supports being conferred on one part of the country over the other. The problem for me as Premier would be if I were to speak in those terms, use that pronoun, but talk about them in terms of an advantage that we might have in Swift Current over the people of Moose Jaw. It wouldn't be acceptable because I have a job and a duty to serve all the people of the province of Saskatchewan and not to support a particular policy because it may confer a certain advantage on we, the people of Swift Current. So he's entirely missed the point. Yeah. And I think that's why Canadians have found his remarks so divisive. I think not just Western Canadians, by the way, but I think Canadians from across the country. We understand the many regions that make up this country, that there are disparate interests that form our great country. And if someone is aspiring to be the national leader of that country, we need to see an understanding from that individual that this kind of division, and really this was very divisive, is not acceptable.
I think you're spot on. I mean, he was speaking as if identifying as a Quebecer was what people were mad at. We know he's a Quebecer. We know that about him. What we didn't know until he opened his mouth, that he believes Quebec ought to have an unfair advantage, and that's why he doesn't want to reform the Senate. That's what he, and I don't think the media held him to it. But let's talk about that second part, the Senate. You have been taking to Twitter, as you do from time to time, talking about Senate reform. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Saskatchewan has on its law books a Senatorial Selection Act, I think, I'm going from memory here, is to allow Saskatchewan people to vote directly. Do you think that we should take baby steps like that, like Alberta has done, to change the Senate? Are you for more wholesale reform, or do you want to abolish the thing?
You know, I was a believer in meaningful reform for the Senate. And when I say meaningful reform, it can't just be tweaking. It can't be the provinces, some provinces, not all, but some might elect a nominee for the Senate. And then the Prime Minister, whoever that might be at any given time, has the option of appointing that person to the Senate. So we would have, on a de facto basis, a hybrid elected, appointed Senate. That's not reform. Meaningful reform has always meant for me that the provinces need to be treated equally. That's the U.S. system, obviously, but it's also what Western Canadians have all fondly referred to for a long time, as you know, Ezra, as a Triple E Senate. That middle E, the equal part, each province being equal, is really a showstopper. It's absolutely fundamental. And Ezra, unfortunately, I have come to the opinion, the firm conclusion after a few years in this particular job, of talking to other premiers and even engaging with the federal government, that kind of meaningful reform is never going to happen in this country. And that's sad, it's unfortunate, but the more populous provinces are not going to agree to it. So we're left with the prospect of tinkering and perhaps giving this body more legitimacy by having a few more elected members without proper representation by the provinces, without a proper review of how it can be effective. We're left with that prospect or the status quo. And I don't think either are acceptable. I think, I know it would be very difficult. Abolition would be very difficult, but I've come to the view personally that this institution needs to just go. We have unicameral governments in the provinces that work well. It can work well nationally. The provinces themselves have been obviously the clear voice for provincial interests. When I think of Prince Edward Island and who speaks for that province, It's probably not Senator Duffy or any other senator from there. It's Premier Giz.
You know, I take your point, and we have strong premiers. But at the end of the day, when the House of Commons votes, as they did, for example, some years ago to bring the National Energy Program, if there was no Senate that was equal, elected, and effective, what's to stop everyone from Ontario and Quebec basically saying, hey, we run the show, we got the numbers? It would be like two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner that night. I mean, if Ontario and Quebec, if their sheer numbers could do whatever they want, we would have to rely on their good faith. Most Ontarians and Quebecers are people of good faith, but there's enough like Trudeau who say, we've got the advantage and we're going to wring everything out of it. Aren't you worried that the provinces would be vulnerable without a check on the lower house?
Well, the Senate was absolutely powerless, or at least unwilling to act with respect to the NEP's introduction decades ago. It didn't help at all, though it's not a rep by pop institution, as you know, Ezra. There's a bit more balance in terms of the regions. 24 senators from the West. Still imbalanced in favor of the Central Canada. But the Senate didn't help with respect to the NEP. The Senate is made up of members who are appointed by parties, by party leaders, and so therefore they toe the party line. So therefore the Senate as a voice for the regions or the provinces, I think, is undermined by that basic fact. And I would just say that a Triple E Senate would perhaps solve that problem. You're right. Would, in the case of some future NEP-like policy, be able to step in and say no? But we're never going to get there. I mean, there's not a populous province that we can think of that's going to vote for this particular kind of a Senate. The election, all three E's, I don't think are possible. I've come to that view. I think abolition is also difficult, but not impossible if there's a will, if people are listening to Canadians, and we'd just be better off. That leaves us, by the way, with the status quo, and we'd be better off without the status quo.
Premier Wall, I've never heard you be pessimistic before. It's the first time. We'll have to talk about this again another time, but great to see you today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for your time.
Folks, stay with us.